Welcome, everyone. We are here to talk about building the modern data stack for generative AI. I'm Rory Berger. I'm a managing director at Progress Partners. I spend most of my time with tech services companies, including companies that advise and consult on data and AI, and been doing this about 15 years. Joined Progress Partners earlier this year. It's my pleasure to introduce two of our executives in residence at Progress Partners, starting with Mark Sommel. Mark, you want to give a brief overview of yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Rory. My name is Mark Sommel. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Hyacinth AI. We build purpose-built AI to solve our customers' problems. These can be unique problems or generalized problems. And I've been an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist most of my career.
And we are also joined by Stephen DeMarco. Stephen?
Hi, hi both. Very happy to be here. So I'm the co-founder of a growth advisory firm called Navigating Growth Partners, which is helping B2B enterprises find growth and disruption. There's no bigger disruption impacting the market right now than generative AI. So that's where like 99.9% of our work is. My background is both entrepreneurial like Mark, and then also corporate. My most relevant role of late has been Chief Digital Officer of Kantar in North America, trying to help scale an insights business and transform it from practices of yore to practices of the future. Also happen to be a professor of marketing at NYU. So I'd like to say I'm an academic, operator, and a consultant all wrapped in one.
Great. And I'd like to touch just briefly on Progress Partners. We are a investment bank as well as a venture capital firm. And as mentioned, we have a network of executives in residence that help bring thought leadership and ideas to us. We've got a page here highlighting some of our recent transactions on the investment banking advisory side, which is where I sit as well. So with that, would love to just kind of kick off the conversation. First question is, for a lot of companies that are hearing about AI and want to get involved and find use cases, where should they start?
Yeah, it's a big question. And I delineate AI from generative AI because most companies are already well along on their AI journey, like machine learning and predictive analytics and things like that. And if they're not, it's not too hard to catch up. It's a capability in a market that's fairly well understood. But when it comes to generative AI, that is kind of the disruption du jour. A couple of things that I would say is every time a major disruption happens in the economy, most reactions are that something new is happening. And in fact, it's not something new, it's just an acceleration of existing trends. So I think the first thing that I would say is don't go try and find the new thing, just double down on what trends are driving your business or your growth factors going forward. So don't panic. Don't try and find the new, just like look at what you're good at. Having said that, there are some statistics that are a little scary. So I'm like a synthesizer of market reports. So McKinsey says that generative AI is going to have a $10 trillion impact on the global economy. And if that's the case, then generative AI will be the third largest economy in the world. So there will be the United States at 30 million, China at 15, generative AI at 10, and then I think everybody else is around like sub 5 trillion. So it's a big deal. There's a lot of economic value to be unlocked. The second thing that I would say is KPMG has done a survey that shows that most of their clients, like 2/3 of their clients, are investing $50 million a year in generative AI. So the capital allocation to generative AI is substantial for large enterprises. So that, you can't put your head in the sand. You need to have strategy. You need to have an investment plan. So that's the good news. The bad news is that the cost of capital right now is higher than it's ever been. When we look at the cost of capital in terms of lending rates now versus during the original digital transformation period, it's 4x more expensive now to raise capital, which means that it's really important that when you spend that capital, you've got a really good plan. And then if you look at the last thing is Gartner estimates somewhere between, if you believe Gartner, 85% of AI investments will not return an ROI, and then 30% of generative AI investments will be abandoned by the end of this year. It shows that despite a lot of opportunity, there's some real risks that are facing companies as they choose how to invest and then how to execute. So it's fraught with it's fraught with peril if you're in the C-suite right now.
So just I'll add to what Steven said there. It's particularly in his comments about some of these, the large consultancies who are helping provide these services to their clients. I think one of the big strategic decisions you make once you get a layer deeper into figuring out what you want to do is, do you build something in-house or do you outsource it? And one framework and way to think about that is what are those activities that you do that are absolutely core to your intellectual property? And when you can get AI closely tied to your company's unique value proposition or competitive advantage, it can be really essential to develop those capabilities in-house. And that means investment. And as Stephen alluded to, it's not cheap to make those investments right now, and that's building a team and building those capabilities. But if it's extending that IP, it can be really valuable to do that in-house. And then there's lots of things that every company does that you can outsource. If it's not core, it can be far more efficient and probably cheaper to find providers who can take care of that for you. So you think about AI, you cook that secret sauce in-house, but you can order the side dishes by takeout.
Well,
good metaphor.
I agree with Mark. There's one thing that you can't do, which is outsource your strategy. And if you ever want to ruin a CEO's day, you can say, what is your generative AI strategy? It's a question that most CEOs can't answer. And if they do answer, they'll provide an answer in terms of what technology investments they're making, right? Which will relate to Amazon, AWS, Azure, OpenAI, whatever it is. But it doesn't come back to the two things that matter the most, which is creating customer value and creating enterprise value. And so what we're doing, and I'm sure Mark is experiencing this too, is before you take the plunge into technology investments, which you need to do, which are going to be substantial, you need to ground it in a very differentiated business strategy, which is already what they're trying to accomplish in the market, but they just lose sight of that when it comes to the shiny new generative AI investments.
Yeah, and as companies are embarking on that and, assuming they have the right strategy and they're being thoughtful about it, how should they think about, what's the right amount to invest, how hard to lean into it?
I've done some research, and then I've thrown out some kind of hand grenade numbers. So my gut tells me that in terms of top line sales, companies should be justifying why they're not investing at least 10% in generative AI. And so, for a billion-dollar company, that's $100 million. For a $250 million company, that's $25 million. For a $1 million company, that's $100,000. That seems to pass the sniff test. And again, it's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a litmus that says why should we invest more or why should we invest less? And it doesn't mean that that's all incremental investment. It could be your existing staff. It could be your business focus. It could be investment in new technology, which of course needs to happen. But all in all, you really have to understand if generative AI is going to be driving the success or failure of your business going forward, which it will, then how can you not at least invest 10% of your resources in that?
Would that be an annual investment or a one-time
Annual
kind of upfront?
ongoing, annual
Annual
ongoing,
ongoing.
and likely increasing. Again, companies are investing in AWS, they're investing in Azure, they're investing in Databricks, they're investing in Snowflake. So it's not like it's necessarily an incremental investment. What you need to do is look at how do the current investments that I'm making support, you know, a world that is generative AI driven, and then if where we're not where we're falling a little bit short, then what is the incremental investment that I need to make?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to start from scratch.
It's good. And then as you make those investments, how should companies be thinking about the ROI on that?
So yeah, so the ROI just, conversation, it does depend on if you're looking at an AI solution that's increasing your top line or helping you save money. And I think we all know the math around ROI. So I'll give a couple stories here on some of our clients and it'll just give you a sense for what you can achieve and what you can shoot for. So with one client, we're helping them process a massive amount of transcripts from interviews. And by example, let's say you've got a knowledge worker who's trying to process 500 pages of transcripts and distill that down into some real valuable insights. That takes time. And that project might take 40 hours. If you use a purpose-built artificial intelligence tool that can pull out the most important information that you want to pull out, we've cut that time down to less than 2 hours. That's a 95% time savings. And now the consultant's freed up to provide higher value work and additional billable work to the client. That's a big one. And another example, we're actually reviewing legal documents for a client, and we're taking that time from 2 hours down to 5 minutes. And this customer estimates that it will save them 1,000 to 2,000 hours a year. And they're telling us the ROI is 8x, which means we didn't charge enough. But that's just, some targets you can go after and some ideas. I mean, there are some real gains to be made here, but you got to go beyond things like giving every employee ChatGPT, for example. And we can talk about that some more later.
Well, you've seen instances where Microsoft has come in and enabled large enterprises with, employee-based Copilot licenses. And all of a sudden, just the licenses themselves cost more than the company has ever thought about budgeting. And so there's an incrementality of like, the $20 a month, which you need to be really careful about. I think, and Mark and I, I think are simpatico on this. There is an evolution which will happen in the market as companies focus first on cost savings, right? Because the application of generative AI for automating existing capabilities is easy to understand and relatively easy to build. There are issues around, making sure that the automated results are, in fact, accurate and ready to make a business decision on. ChatGPT is different than, enterprise applications of generative AI. But you still need to make sure that you can actually make a business decision on the results that you get back from conversational interface. That's like kind of table stakes. The big opportunities around how do you create and unlock new value for your customers, and then how do you transform your business model? One of the things that I think you'll see is in any earnings call, every CEO will say that what they're doing with generative AI is transformational. And then you ask them kind of, what are your initiatives? And they're all about cost savings, which is fine. I mean, that's impactful. And then, then you ask them, what are you doing with those cost savings? Are you just taking those cost savings, or are you reinvesting it in innovation? and a lot of the time they're just taking cost savings to goose their margins. Like that's not a sustainable strategy. So I think what we're focusing on is, yeah, definitely like focus on where you can automate things, but then what's the next strategy to create customer value through true revenue generation, through creating more products or faster products or whatever, more valuable products, so that you can actually grow the top line, and then how do you use it to actually create new business models or enter new markets. I've not seen many applications of generative AI in revenue generation or transformation yet.
Makes sense. And then if you want to implement these strategies, what are kind of the building blocks and the foundations that you need to have in place before you can go on this journey?
Mark, I think you would agree that it's not turnkey.
Yeah, it really isn't turnkey. But if we step back for a second, maybe talk about that kind of overall readiness to get going, and then we can drill in a little bit. We look at it as kind of like a four-part framework. First is you've got to have some clear use cases. It's not just a fire and forget technology. Second is you need a real data strategy, and I'd like to go a little bit deeper there in a moment. Um, the third one is your tech readiness. You have the infrastructure and everything ready to go to use generative AI. And then lastly, and in some ways the most important, is your people readiness. So they're ready to embrace these tools, or they're ready to embrace the change that's going to bring to their day-to-day. Even though that change may be great for them, it may eliminate some of their grunt work. We all know how people feel about change. So that change readiness is absolutely essential. But I think we've hit upon a bunch of use cases as we've had this conversation. And starting there, I agree with Stephen. A lot of the generative AI use cases have been around cost savings to date. I'm really excited to see what companies start doing around the revenue generation side, or customer retention or customer support. There's a bunch of stuff there happening. On the data strategy side, data prep is huge. I mean, bad data in your organization is like the murder hornet to adopting AI. It will stop you in your tracks if you don't realize it. And it can be anything from, your customer data and your CRM to, you're trying to ingest 2 decades worth of PDFs and unlock the value there. And just that one example, and we'll just go deep on that for a second. PDFs are like a massive hidden data problem in adopting AI. So on the screen to us humans, a PDF looks like a bunch of text, right? But the thing is, a machine may view that as an image file wrapped in a PDF wrapper, or something else scanned in, God forbid. And we have found that you may actually have to go full old school OCR to actually extract text out of a PDF that an AI can read. And of course, if it can read it, then it can help you with what you're trying to do. So that's just one example, but understanding the status of your data is absolutely essential to successful AI deployment. And you've got to get out ahead of that before you really start finding success with AI.
I've had experiences with uploading PDFs for, analysis, and it's one of those experiences like the old Seinfeld story, like, just tell me what movie you want to see. Like, I feel like I'm entering the data on behalf of generative AI so that it actually gets the cells correct. And at scale, that's very scary.
Yeah, I'll add to that too. The next, as you think about the data side, a huge one is data privacy. And we talk about this with all our customers. Everyone's worried about it, and rightly so. We have, if you're using one of those public-facing AI chat tools, there is questions about what they do with your data once it goes in their systems. And so that data privacy piece is a big deal. And it's kind of a dance, and I think this is what gets, can get hard about how to deal with your data privacy as an organization, because there are some things that you don't have to keep so secure. Like maybe your IT support policies, if that leaked out, okay, but maybe that's not, showing somebody how to use their laptop isn't the end of the world. And so you kind of have to do this dance where you protect that super sensitive data. If you're a healthcare company, you got to take care of that data. You've got to find a HIPAA compliant provider who can help you. Or if you're a financial institution, you have tons of compliance needs, you've got to protect that information. But you can get started on projects that maybe aren't as sensitive. And so that kind of bifurcation of that data is also another really important part of your deployment strategy.
Mark, from your experience, when you get a green light from a customer, how much kind of data preparation, everything, data classification, cleansing, mapping, all of that stuff. How long does that take? Is it 30 days or 6 months, or does it depend based on the readiness of the organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bummer to say this, that it depends, but it does depend. Um, that said, you can create, and we've built some tools that help speed up that process. In some cases, the data is ready to go, and you can get started on day one. But yeah, in other cases, there can be some challenges there. And so that's, when I say get ahead of it, I think, Stephen, that's the important part is take a look at that stuff. Maybe take a look at it with, when I say that stuff, take a look at your data and what state it's in and if it's ready for AI. Do that with somebody you trust that's an in-house person or an outsourced provider who can give you the right advice to say, yeah, that's ready to go, and then this other stuff isn't ready to go, and then you can start that prep process.
And you'd love to say that, like, hey, if you work with Databricks, it'll give you a, X% advantage versus working with another data lake platform. Have you seen any kind of like inherent advantages from the technology providers? Oh, by the way, like, just side note, when you look at growth in the market and where enterprise value is created, the technology providers are crushing it. The actual enterprises who are using the technology providers are still trying to eke out, 3 to 4 to 5% growth a year, which is it's tough.
It'll be interesting to see that normalize over time, I think,
Yeah.
Stephen. As far as the providers, we haven't worked, and in full disclosure, so much with the data lake providers, but we do work with a lot of the generative AI providers and the underlying tools and some of the, the big data center providers and cloud providers like AWS. And there is going to be more and more delineation between what those tools are good at and what they're not good at, and how you use those tools to your benefit. If we go back, not to sit on this data thing for too long, but if we go back to that, if you stick all your data in a out in RAM, you're going to spend a lot of money, right, processing that data. And if you can figure out a, kind of a data strategy where you're pushing some of it out, let's say to S3, if we stick on the Amazon, right, and let it just sit there, that's a cheap way to store it, and only pulling that data that you need at the moment you need it. That's the kind of stuff, as you really get going, that's going to help save you a lot of money over time. But you need a strategy to do that, right? What's the right way to do that?
That's helpful. And where do you see this all going in the future? What's next?
I think I've got some hypotheses, but I think Mark and I both agree that the technology is under the hood, right? It's about the consumer experiences that it enables, or the business experiences that it enables. So going to a conversational interface is a little bit hard to wrap your head around, but it's going to be profound. So I think that's one huge thing. I think going to an agent-based interface where there's proactivity on your behalf, which has long been talked about, and I'm not sure there's a great example of it happening yet. is pretty cool. And then, 10 years out from now, quantum is gonna it's gonna turn everything upside down. One of my hypotheses is that the success of an industry and of organizations that operate within that industry is speed. So like, how fast can you actually run your business? It's not about like having real-time results to provide customers with real-time solutions. It's just about like the cadence at which your organization operates. And if you've worked in large enterprises, you know that they typically operate pretty slow. And then if you look at the sectors, call it tech, call it, CPG, call it automotive, everybody kind of regresses to the mean. So like, you only have to operate as fast or slightly faster than the average companies in your space. And I think when quantum comes, it's going to be, is there a bigger word than disruptive? It's going to be destructive for a lot of companies. But that's, somewhere between 5 and 10 years out.
Yeah, Stephen, I'd love to come back to that very first thing you said, and I agree wholeheartedly. Um, it's going to be about user adoption, and this technology, the way it sits right now. I mean, we've got a last mile problem. I mean, does anyone else feel like we've gone backwards? Like, what do we have, command prompts now? We're chatting with the computers. I keep waiting for ChatGPT to ask me, would you like to play a game? I mean, this is not the pathway to massive user adoption. I think of it as there's the meme out there: push button, receive bacon. People just want their work done for them, and if that's automating a grunt work or whatever it is, right now there's a lot of companies experimenting with giving their employees like a Copilot license or ChatGPT licenses, and that's great. You're asking your employees to experiment and find something that maybe helps other people in the company. That's a little bit of they call it the hopium strategy. Like, let's hope that people get out there and find us something good. Great. That's fine. The trick about that is that it really takes 6 to 12 months to mint a really good prompt engineer. And you're going to have a couple people in your organization that will try to do that. And that's great. But at the end of the day, people just want to push the button and get their bacon. Do my work. And whether it's agentic, Stephen was referring to, or just solving one problem, that's what they want. So I think we're going to have to address that as an industry. And I think we're going to see more and more products come out that do address that. But we've got to move on. We really have to move on from a chat-based interface for this generative AI to get widespread adoption.
I think what's interesting too is when you look at, because I focus a lot on the psyche of the CEO, which is, CEOs tend to view their market opportunities in terms of the constraints of the existing market. And then a technology comes along that is kind of redefines competitiveness. And what happens is, for the first year or two, that technology, the applications of that technology are bottoms up. So they're just kind of like things that we could do. And when I look a lot at Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of enterprise kind of chat GPT implementations that have really clever names that kind of riff off of the organization's names, right? So you've got Lucy, you've got Randy, you've got Mickey, and it's all like, related back to who the enterprise is, but there's no business value for it, right? They're just kind of like maybe proof of concept, to be fair. But as soon as CEOs get their head around the technology implications, then they can actually set the strategy to leverage the technology to accomplish their business outcomes. So the paradox is, until technology innovation happens, CEOs are still operating within the same kind of mental constraint as it exists today. As soon as a technology happens, then it opens up the market for implementation, but it can't be tech-led. It needs to be business-led, tech-enabled.
Yeah, well said, Stephen. You know, Stephen, I want to come back to something you said a couple minutes ago, and that was about how some of the technology providers are raking in the dough while the companies are still struggling to get their 3 to 4% growth. And let's be real, that's that when we talk about the future and trends, generative AI right now is extremely expensive, and that cannot continue. And the trick right now is that as these, you know, the foundation points of generative AI are these large language models, and they're getting bigger. And when they get bigger, they get more expensive. So ChatGPT 4 or GPT 4, the APIs there cost more than 3.5. Okay, well, it's a better tool. That's the justification. But how many times in the technology industry do we see tech getting more and more expensive? Usually goes the other way, right? Gets more efficient, gets better. And we've got to move to that direction for widespread adoption too at the company level, because this stuff can get super expensive if you don't put guardrails on it. So we're seeing tons and tons of large language models out there. I think some of the open source ones are going to become the foundation for a bunch of corporate companies doing their own strategy. Um, there's some small ones, maybe some small ones find their way into niche applications. They're way cheaper to run. Um, but yeah, that's got to be one of these trends that's got to turn around into the right direction where it's going to start costing less and less, and in order to drive adoption of generative AI across all the companies, all industries.
One of the things that we talked about, Mark, that was really interesting is like the hidden cost of submitting a whatever a prompt, and there's tokens, and then there's kind of like sub tokens apparently, which unless you're measuring it, you have no idea. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great point. So there's if you're submitting your chat prompt, and even if you're doing this, inside your company, Copilot, whatever it is, there's a system prompt that goes along with it. Now with Chat GPT or Copilot, you're paying your monthly fee, but if you are building a solution that's based on APIs, yeah, Stephen, to your point, you're paying by the token. And if you want to get, let's say, for example, you want to, get an AI that's highly accurate, and you do it on like a retrieval augmented generation system with doing a bunch of other stuff, you're going to be sending a system prompt along with every prompt that a user send, and that gets expensive. We've had customers run up thousands of dollars in API fees at a blink of an eye, because they weren't watching what some of these things are. So you really you need to test, and that's got to be part of the strategy up front, in terms of understanding the cost side of it as an organization is, do your pilots, do your tests, and get an understanding of what the true cost is, including those hidden costs, as you alluded to, before you go full deployment.
And talk about a P&L nightmare, because you can't budget for API based usage when your team is blowing it out.
Yeah.
So that's a little scary.
It's a little scary, and I think, in some sense, I think that's why we're going to see a lot more kind of open source, self-hosted models once those get easier to do. I mean, people, hardcore technologists can do that, right? But the average organization have the skills to host an LLM internally and then keep those costs under control. That's certainly going to happen. And, if we kind of round this all the way back to data privacy, if you host your own LLM, you've got a lot more control over where that data goes in and out of, right? So we're gonna, and I think that's one of the trends is different use cases are going to require different technologies. They're going to require different LLMs. I'm chuckling because I come back to, if you guys see the movie The Martian, and Mark Watney is
Sure.
stuck on Mars, and at some point he says, "I'm going to have to science the shit out of this." Well, we're at a point with this generative AI technology that it's not all about the LLM either. Like at some point, you're going to have to engineer the shit out of it, right? So what controls do you put in place? How do you make it easier for users to use? How do you split your data into, different places in AWS so that you save costs. And that's good old engineering, guys. It's not all just generative AI. And that's going to be an important part of this. And I think for companies and trends, training the next generation of developers and engineers who can see with both lenses, both the generative AI side and the traditional software engineering is going to be extremely important.
I think that's where, Mark, maybe our two companies are complementary, which is I'm trying to attack it, or we're trying to attack it from like, make sure you have a very customer-centric strategy from the get-go, and any AI investment needs to have a quantifiable impact on customer lifetime value and enterprise value, because if it doesn't, then you really need to challenge why you're making that investment in the first place. And most business cases have ROIs, but the ROIs do not connect at all to lifetime value or enterprise value. There's a big disconnect there. But assume you get through that gate, then there's some real decisions that you need to make around how to implement. It could be vendor selection or it could be technology partner selection, but it's probably more like optimization, it sounds like, which may or may not be an in-house capability. Have you seen that your clients have the skills to make those decisions, or do they really need to, go to an outside partner for expertise?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this state in time, Stephen, we're seeing a lot of people who are just trying things. Like they're trying to do something in ChatGPT that would require subject matter expert level of expertise to answer. And they're seeing that, I don't mean to pick on ChatGPT, so let's just generalize that into any of these, chat AI tools. They hallucinate, they're trained on the entire internet. It's kind of like I use the analogy, any of these chat tools, it's like a newly minted college graduate, and they are smart and they're driven, they're motivated, and these AI tools are so motivated to answer your question, they'll throw you stuff that makes no sense, right? And yet, if you give them the right context and give them the fuller picture around what you want them to do, they can be so much better than most people get out of them. And that's kind of what you were talking about, Stephen, is a lot of the companies don't have the expertise in-house yet, and they'll develop it. But what they do have is a ton of expertise around their business and what they're good at. And what they need to do, at least in this day and age, is work with somebody who can help bring that expertise to an AI that they can then help transform their business.
I have another question for you, Mark, and this might be insider information, but I've experienced this, or our company has experienced this, and you might as well. How much of the need to invest in AI or generative AI forces enterprises to resolve their tech debt problem finally?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you're hitting on a massive use case for generative AI. And we've certainly seen it. We don't necessarily help with that problem. But you think about generative AI is really good at coding, right? And I think that's probably one of the earliest, best use cases. You hear stories of people, saying the productivity goes up by 50%. Most software engineers rely on Google to help them code, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean they're smart. They go out and they try to find places where code has been written, because why reinvent the wheel? And these AI tools are great at helping them, write code, especially when that code's been written before. And you think about, that tech debt problem. Can you get AI to come in and solve some of that tech debt? It could be, not just a software company, but some of these big enterprises that are stuck on really old platforms.
Yeah.
Can you give them a big block of C? I don't know. and have it rewrite it into a modern, web application framework. I think that's coming. I do. And I think that's a good thing because I think I think about some of the big companies, big processes are stuck behind old systems that can't change.
Right. Totally agree. And that's another example of tech providers growing and like generating real revenues, but the enterprises themselves not necessarily getting anything out of it. I call it kind of like, when you put a new roof on your house, like, your roof doesn't leak, but nobody gets to see it. But the roofers make a lot of money. Doesn't really add a lot of value to you or your real estate property.
Stephen, are
Sure.
you seeing any specific industries, like trends there that seem to be more ready to adopt or try AI at the state of the game?
Yeah, I mean, anything where it's like kind of knowledge worker intensive. So professional services, no brainer. You see it in legal, you see it in consulting. So it's great. Now that's scary for those industries because it's going to minimize the amount of people that they need to employ. And so if you're in one of those companies, you really need to figure out what your future is. And if you're building your career about becoming an employee of one of those companies, probably not a great place to work. So definitely professional services. I think you hit on something around coding, like it can accelerate coding. There's a lot around marketing services and kind of creative development and creating advertising and messaging and blog content, which I think the jury is out on right now. Because I work in that industry and I'm also a consumer of that industry. We've all seen LinkedIn posts which are clearly generative AI generated, and you're just kind of like, oh, that's kind of lame. Like, you didn't spend any time thinking about this, so why should I spend any time on it? I will say that the biggest challenge, I think, for marketers right now, if you were to say, like, to your CMO, what's your biggest challenge right now? They will say, I need to be relevant to my consumers. Right. That's a scary, that's an existential comment right there. And I'm going to use generative AI to become more relevant to my consumers is probably not the ultimate solution.
Well, I think this has been really productive discussion. Appreciate both of your thoughts on the issue.
Thank you, Rory. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for having us, Rory.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you guys for joining.
Alrighty, that was great.
All right, did you get what you needed?
We
Was I too wordy?
No, I